The air in the barracks of the 6th Cadian Company was thick with the scent of ozone, gun oil, and sweat, yet nothing smelled more dangerous than the silence that had fallen over Sergeant Cashin Vorel. Even the hum of the nearby manufactorum felt muted, as if the machinery itself had paused to witness the unraveling of a man once considered unbreakable. Every step he took echoed against the cold ceramite walls, a metronome counting down to an inevitable reckoning. He had survived countless battles, faced horrors no sane mortal could endure, yet it was not an orc warlord, nor a tyrannid hive mind, that threatened to destroy him. It was the failure within his own soul. The mantle of the Emperor's chosen, the armor that once carried him across worlds, now felt like a tomb pressing in from all sides. Memories of fallen brothers, the faces of civilians he could not save, and the whispering doubts seeded during long campaigns assaulted him with relentless precision. Vorel's hand clenched the bolter at his side, though he knew this weapon could not shoot away what had already taken root. The brutal truth that even the strongest among the Adeptus Astartes are not immune to doubt, despair, and the grinding machinery of the Imperium's judgment. Somewhere in the heart of the hive world they defended, someone would mark him as unworthy, and the consequences of that marking would be measured not in days or hours, but in the slow, corrosive erosion of honor, purpose, and identity. As the metallic hiss of servitors echoed from the lower levels, Cashin Vorel's thoughts were pierced by a sharper sound, the faint but distinct sound of his own heartbeat, slow, uneven, human. And in that pulse, he recognized the impossible. He was still alive, yet the world had already begun its reckoning against him. The dawn broke over the ash-strewn plains of Armageddon with a muted glow, the sun a dim smear of ochre through the lingering smoke of the previous night's bombardment. Sergeant Cashin Vorel stood on the edge of the ruined manufactorum, ceramite armor scorched in patches, bolter hanging loosely at his side. Around him, his squad moved with mechanical precision, yet something in the rhythm of their drills, the tension in their shoulders, felt different, unspoken, a recognition that their leader was no longer unassailable. The first fracture, subtle as a hairline crack in ceramite, had already begun. It did not announce itself with explosions or accusations. It whispered through the corridors of the mind, a hesitation during target selection, a delayed response to a comrade's call, a flash of doubt about the mission's necessity. Vorel had fought alongside his battle brothers through the worst of tyrannid swarms, had survived the acid rains of Vrax, and yet the enemy he faced now was not external. It was the internal calculus of guilt, memory, and imperfection. He recalled the moment clearly. A civilian sector he had failed to secure, innocents left exposed during an evacuation, while he had ordered a tactical reposition to preserve his squad. It had seemed the only choice at the time, yet the memory returned like a relentless echo. In the heat of the moment, he had told himself that judgment belonged to the Emperor alone. Yet now, as he walked among the scorched metal and shattered walkways, he recognized the subtle shift in the eyes of those who followed him. Trust is a fragile alloy, forged in fire and tested in war. It could corrode as easily as ceramite in acid, and he had felt the first stains of that corrosion. The manufacturum's skeletal walls groaned under the weight of lingering artillery fire. Smoke drifted through the open vents, carrying with it the acrid stench of promethium and the faint tang of ozone. Each movement of Vorel's armor grated against the rusted beams, each step a reminder that the world itself was fractured, and that within this broken landscape, even a space marine could feel the peril of isolation. His hand brushed the hilt of his chain's word, yet he did not raise it. Combat would not erase the fracture, not here, not now. He moved forward, not because he felt courage, but because he was bound by the memory of vows and the relentless expectations of the Adeptus Astartes. In the barracks, the subtle signs were everywhere if one looked closely. The whispered debriefs ended when he entered, the slight hesitation in replies, the absence of the usual nods of respect from junior Marines. On the surface, all remained the same. The ranks fell in line, orders were obeyed, and the Imperial Aquila gleamed on his pauldrons. But beneath, the machinery of evaluation had already begun its work. Vorel sensed it, a quiet audit of deeds and failures, a review not in data slates or written reports, but in the minute glances and measured gestures of those around him. The first fracture is never loud. It is patient, creeping, and inexorable. And once it begins, the course of a life, even one forged in gene seed and ceramite, cannot escape its pull. He paused at the edge of the drill yard, overlooking the smoking remains of a previous skirmish with orc raiders. The bodies of the fallen lay scattered, their green flesh and jagged armor scorched into unrecognizable forms. Voral's gaze swept over the wreckage, and for the first time in decades, the fear that he could be found wanting gnawed at him. He remembered his own brothers, the faces of those he could not save, and the whispered prayers of civilians now silenced. A space marine is trained to endure the impossible, to act without hesitation, to mask all emotion beneath discipline and resolve. But there is a threshold beyond which even the strongest armor cannot shield the mind. That threshold had been crossed quietly, without ceremony, yet irreversibly. And so Cassian Voral moved through the ruins, fully armored yet increasingly hollowed from within, carrying the weight of doubt as heavily as the bolter on his arm. Each order he gave, each command he repeated, was a fragment of the man he once was, now tested against the silent judgment of his own conscience and the imperceptible scrutiny of his peers. The first fracture had begun, and with it, the inexorable erosion of purpose, authority, and identity. Somewhere in the intricate bureaucracy of the Imperium, in the unseen eyes of those who monitor, judge, and record, the name of Cassian Voral had already begun its slow descent into the margins. The horizon shimmered with the heat of distant fires, and the wind carried a whispered premonition, as if the very air conspired to remind him that survival was no longer a guarantee. It was a question. The question was not whether he would die on the battlefield, but whether he could endure the far greater siege within. The unyielding, invisible forces that would piece by piece dismantle a hero until all that remained was memory and shadow. The hours stretched like chains across the manufactorum as Voral continued his rounds, each corridor a testament to previous battles and the Imperium's uncompromising machinery. Servitors scuttled about, their cogitative eyes flickering in the dim ember light, responding to commands that once flowed from him without question, now hesitated by the silent unease permeating their operators. The drill yard echoed with the rhythmic pounding of power fists against training dummies. Yet even here, the air carried an edge of tension, subtle enough that only those attuned to the human and post-human psyche could perceive it. Fellow battle brothers avoided meeting his eyes, or offered too formal salutes that clanked with hollow precision, as if aware that the man leading them was, in some imperceptible way, no longer fully anchored to the bedrock of trust. Voral's mind replayed each decision that had led him here. Each choice, previously deemed tactical or necessary, now seemed a potential indictment. The evacuation, the misjudged response to incoming artillery, the civilians left behind, these were more than mistakes. They were fractures in a narrative he had once controlled. Every recollection was accompanied by the invisible weight of observation, the unvoiced evaluation of those whose loyalty could pivot on the merest hint of flaw. He realized that authority is never a static power. It is a living, breathing contract, renewed daily through trust, fear, and respect. And once the contract begins to unravel, no amount of force or intimidation can fully restore it. He entered the command chamber, its walls scarred by Prometheum fires, and paused at the central holomap. The schematics of Armageddon flickered in muted greens and ochres, a reminder that the battlefield itself was a living, shifting entity. Orders scrolled across data slates, yet for the first time, Voral questioned not the enemy's movements, but the efficacy of his own judgment. He traced the paths of deployments, the arcs of artillery fire, the positioning of squads. Patterns that once inspired confidence now seemed potential errors, small miscalculations that could compound catastrophically. Even the machines, unfeeling and programmed, seemed to acknowledge this subtle tremor. Servitors paused slightly longer at his commands. Maintenance droids hesitated as if sensing uncertainty. Outside, the wind carried the scent of scorched metal and the faint, copper tang of blood. Smoke from distant manufactorums coiled against the skyline, painting the horizon in faded crimsons and muted green teals, the firelight casting long, shifting shadows across broken streets and shattered rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a Skitarii patrol reported a minor breach of perimeter security, a situation trivial in ordinary circumstances, yet Voral felt the grip of dread tighten in his chest. He had survived countless battles, faced foes whose very existence mocked mortality, yet the creeping fear of internal collapse, of irrelevance, of being stripped of name and purpose, was far more suffocating than any alien monstrosity. The night fell in layered darkness, soot-black and heavy, interspersed with the flickering embers of distant fires. Voral retreated to his private chambers, yet sleep offered no sanctuary. His mind continued its relentless audit, running scenarios of failure and oversight with obsessive precision. Each imagined outcome carried the sting of inevitability, a reminder that in the vast machinery of the Imperium, no action escaped scrutiny. He understood, with chilling clarity, that the first fracture was merely the beginning. Trust withdrawn, authority questioned, purpose eroded. Even the most formidable space marine, sculpted in gene seed and ceramite, could be rendered fragile in the face of unrelenting internal judgment. By dawn, the fracture had spread like ink in water, subtle yet pervasive. Every glance from a battle brother, every hesitation in response, reinforced the growing isolation. Voral's body remained a warrior's exemplar, but his mind, once a repository of confidence and tactical clarity, now trembled under the weight of doubt. In the silent spaces between orders, the unspoken judgment of others, and the quiet of his own conscience, the man who had survived countless wars began to feel the inexorable pull toward obsolescence. The first fracture, invisible to those not paying attention, had begun to dictate the terms of survival. And yet, Voral moved onward, bound by honor, habit, and the faint hope that the crack could be bridged, or at the very least endured. The shadow of what was to come loomed beyond the horizon, quiet but unyielding, a reminder that the end of trust was only the beginning of the Inquisitor's true trial. Voral felt the walls of the Inquisition close in, not with the roar of artillery or the heat of Promethean fires, but with the subtle, suffocating weight of silent scrutiny. The corridors of the fortress monastery, once echoing with the rhythm of purposeful footsteps, now carried only the muted hum of distant machinery and the whisper of eyes that watched too closely. Colleagues moved past him with a careful neutrality, their expressions blank yet loaded, each gesture measured to convey obedience while concealing judgment. Even the air seemed charged, heavy with anticipation, as if the very molecules had learned the language of accusation. It was here, amidst the stone and steel, that Voral understood the machinery of unspoken trial, a tribunal without judges, a sentence without pronouncement, yet absolute in its effectiveness. His retinue, once loyal and unflinching, now responded with hesitance. Lieutenants lingered at the edges of his commands, their eyes darting toward superior officers, silently questioning whether to act or hesitate. Servitors paused, cogitator eyes flickering, delaying minor tasks as if sensing the fracturing authority of their master. Orders he issued with precision were met with small, imperceptible delays. The fortress itself seemed to test his resolve, as though the stones and pipes, scorched and warped from centuries of service, had absorbed the sentiment of doubt. Voral realized that the Inquisition, like all Imperium institutions, thrived not on fear alone, but on the unbroken belief in authority. Once that belief faltered, even subtly, the gears of the organization began to grind against him. He passed through the relic chamber, where artifacts of forgotten crusades glimmered in the muted firelight. Each relic, sacred and deadly in equal measure, seemed to watch him, as if aware of his dwindling legitimacy. A sigil that once conferred respect now felt like a scarlet letter etched in ceramite. Voral's fingers hovered over an ancient bolter, the engraved Latin script reflecting ember light in faded crimson and parchment cream. He hesitated, not from fear of violence, but from the acute awareness that every object, every weapon, every coded authorization could be reinterpreted as evidence against him. Authority, he understood, was both tangible and ephemeral, residing as much in perception as in law, and perception had begun to betray him. Outside, the manufactorum sky was a tapestry of muted green teal and soot-black smoke, rising from fires that had long since ceased to be surprising. Distant shadows of Scutarii and Adeptus Custodes moved through the haze, their forms imposing yet detached, embodiments of impartiality that magnified Voral's growing isolation. Reports arrived via Vox Grill, each carefully phrased to avoid overt accusation, yet heavy with implication. Units were reassigned under the guise of routine operations, relics sent to review, and access codes subtly revoked. Every bureaucratic maneuver was a blade, surgical in precision, stripping authority while maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Voral retreated to a private chamber, the walls lined with codices and ceremonial staves, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. He recognized the truth of his predicament. He was still fully clothed in the symbols of power, still issuing orders that were technically obeyed, yet the substance of his authority had already begun to dissolve. Trust, loyalty, and respect, the trinity upon which command was built, had quietly eroded, leaving only the form of leadership. Paranoia, often dismissed by outsiders, here was a survival tool, and its targets were precise and unrelenting. He could feel the invisible eyes measuring every micro-expression, every hesitation, every silent thought, cataloging each for future judgment. By nightfall, Vorel's understanding of the Inquisition's inner workings had deepened into an intimate terror. The process was not chaotic, nor was it overtly brutal. It was methodical, invisible, and merciless. Colleagues were interrogators, allies were witnesses, and every interaction was a potential verdict. The unmasking, as it was whispered in shadowed corridors, was complete in its subtlety. The Inquisitor, still living, still moving through familiar halls, had already been sentenced. Authority remained as a mask, yet behind it lay only isolation, suspicion, and the creeping knowledge that survival no longer depended on strength or skill, but on enduring the cold precision of an empire that demanded perfection. Dawn brought no relief. The light filtering through stained glass apertures was muted, the colors of saints and crusades dulled by the grime of centuries, and yet it illuminated everything Vorel wished to ignore. He walked the familiar corridors, noting the slight stiffness of a custodian's salute, the almost imperceptible hesitation of a Scutarii automaton following his path. Each encounter was a mirror reflecting his diminishing relevance, and with every step, he felt the walls themselves lean closer, as if eager to catalog his errors. Here, in the heart of the fortress monastery, the unspoken sentence pressed against his mind with relentless weight, shaping his actions, curbing his instinct, and transforming familiarity into a labyrinth of subtle threats. Reports arrived with clinical precision, data slates flickering with messages stripped of warmth or reassurance. One subordinate, a junior acolyte, approached with a query and left without the usual deferential nod, their eyes avoiding his own. Vorel understood the message instantly. Even loyalty was conditional, a variable measured against an unarticulated code of suspicion. Orders he issued were followed, but only to the extent that they would not compromise the ongoing observation. Even minor successes became irrelevant, catalogued as anomalies rather than proof of competence. Every gesture, every command, every decision was now filtered through a lens of potential condemnation. He passed by a chamber where relics were once consecrated with ceremony. Now each artifact, each ceremonial blade, seemed to serve as evidence against him. The Inquisitor's gauntlet hands brushed the rim of a silver reliquary, noting for the first time how cold and unyielding the metal felt, how the inscriptions seemed to judge him silently. This was the theater of the unmasking, silent, meticulous, and pervasive. Authority was a performance, and Vorel had unknowingly begun to falter on stage. Even those who owed their lives to him treated him with cautious neutrality, and the fortress itself, an extension of the Imperium's memory and power, began to reflect his eroding influence. The central command chamber, usually a place of clarity and control, had become an arena of observation. Vorel seated himself, scanning tactical maps that now seemed to mock rather than guide. Every assignment he issued was preemptively questioned in whispers. Every request for information returned with meticulously crafted delays. No words of accusation were spoken, yet each silence, each pause, each carefully neutral gesture reinforced the inescapable truth. His name, his rank, and his achievements were being methodically stripped away. The machinery of judgment did not roar. It whispered, it calculated, and it struck with precision invisible to all but its target. In the lower halls, where servants and acolytes conducted their routines, Vorel witnessed the subtle fracture of allegiance. Retainers who once anticipated his needs now hesitated, as though waiting for permission from some unseen arbiter. Servitors, programmed to obey, occasionally faltered, misinterpreting voice sprints or delaying actions in ways too precise to be random. The fortress itself conspired with these small betrayals, its lights flickering at inconvenient moments, its sensors occasionally misreporting. An orchestrated theater in which the Inquisitor was both audience and victim. By midday, the emotional weight of the unmasking pressed heavily upon him. Vorel recognized the futility of resistance. The process was not about confrontation, nor about proving innocence. It was about the gradual, invisible extraction of legitimacy, the slow erosion of perceived authority until only the facade remained. The Inquisitor who had once issued commands with unyielding confidence now measured every word, every gesture, every glance, aware that misstep could be recorded, interpreted, and used against him without a single formal declaration. Paranoia was no longer a symptom. It was the very environment in which he breathed, moved, and survived. As evening fell, shadows pooled in the corners of corridors, and the fortress became a labyrinth of half-light and suspicion. Vorel paused before a towering statue of a long-dead Inquisitor, the stone eyes seeming to pierce his soul. He understood, with the clarity of cold dread, that the unmasking had already claimed him. He was still alive, still moving, still issuing commands, but the essence of his authority, the intangible force that had once made men obey without question, had been meticulously dismantled. What remained was survival alone, and even that depended on navigating a web of observation, loyalty tested by fear, and the invisible hand of judgment that the Imperium wielded with perfect, silent efficiency. The corridors of the fortress monastery had become corridors of exile. Vorel moved through them like a ghost, a body still recognized by protocol but emptied of consequence. Doors that once opened at his signet's touch now required cumbersome authorization. Keys, codes, and rituals he had mastered over decades no longer bent to his will. Each lock that denied him passage, each voice that addressed him with formal but hollow respect, was a scalpel carving away fragments of identity he had assumed unassailable. The fortress had always mirrored the structure of the Imperium itself, vast, ordered, and implacable. Now it reflected only his diminishing relevance, the quiet collapse of name and purpose. He found himself in the archives, among tomes that smelled of ancient ink and dust. For decades, these volumes had been his companions, repositories of knowledge that reinforced both authority and conviction. Now they were instruments of erasure. Data slates and scrolls once annotated with his judgments bore marginalia in unfamiliar hands. His own edicts were amended without notice, redacted as though the fortress itself conspired to overwrite history. Every step through this sanctum was a confrontation with absence. The absence of recognition, of respect, of the unspoken assent that had once sustained him. Servitors, mechanical and obedient to the strictest codes, became unpredictable. Tasks that had been routine were deferred or ignored. Systems that had responded instantly to his commands now faltered. Each delay, each misfiring cog or misinterpreted voice sprint, was not random. It was a deliberate withdrawal of service, a subtle reminder that the Imperium's machinery no longer acknowledged him as master. The silence of loyalty weighed heavier than any shout of accusation. It was a vacuum that erased his presence while leaving his form intact, a torment of being simultaneously seen and denied. He entered a chamber he had once used for interrogations, now dimly lit by failing arc lamps and the flicker of distant forges. The instruments of authority, vox grills, data slates, and ceremonial artifacts, stood like sentinels observing his fall. One relic, a ceremonial blade long bonded to his line of inquisitors, caught the light and gleamed with cold judgment. When he touched it, he felt no warmth, no resonance, only the echo of absence, the acknowledgement that the rituals which had once consecrated his role now bore witness to his erasure. The weight of tradition, once a source of pride, had become a lever crushing him beneath its own inevitability. In the inner sanctum, Vorel faced the human cost of this stripping. Retainers who had once mirrored his authority now diverted their gazes, murmured among themselves, or simply withdrew into protocol-driven silence. Conversations that had been collaborative were now performances in restraint, calibrated to avoid implicating him. Each interaction reinforced the knowledge that identity, once constructed in service to the Imperium, could be deconstructed with surgical precision. Authority was no longer a force emanating from him. It was a lens applied to him by others, shaping every perception, every action, every breath. The taste of recycled air, once ignorable, became oppressive. Even in solitude, he sensed the ever-watchful architecture, the hum of the fortress, the subtle shifts in mechanical servitors, the creak of corridors designed to convey presence and history. He was no longer a participant in the life of the fortress. He was a cataloged variable, observed for compliance, monitored for error, and marked for eventual removal. Every breath, every glance, every heartbeat was a negotiation with a system that no longer recognized his claim to name or purpose. By the time night fell, Vorel understood the full measure of the stripping. It was neither violent nor public. It was procedural, meticulous, and absolute. He still walked the halls, still issued commands, still existed in the formal records. But he was a body without essence, a name without weight, a shadow measured against the unyielding standards of the Imperium. The fortress, vast and immovable, had become a mirror reflecting not his authority, but its absence. In this vacuum, survival alone remained, fragile and contingent, as the machinery of erasure continued its quiet, inexorable work. Days bled into nights with no distinction, each cycle a repetition of denial and hollow recognition. Vorel's schedule, once dictated by strategy sessions, interrogations, and inspections, now consisted of empty rituals and meaningless observations. He walked the same halls, passed the same locked doors, and heard the same hollow echoes, each repetition a reminder that his authority existed only as an illusion. The fortress responded to him as it would to any subordinate, with deference in form but no deference in substance. His mind, trained for decades in the subtleties of command, struggled to reconcile the familiar environment with the unfamiliar weight of irrelevance. He discovered a forgotten data slate tucked behind a ledger of older edicts. The screen flickered to life, displaying annotations and overrides that had been added without his knowledge. Every order he had issued in the past months had been modified, some even reattributed to other inquisitors. The realization was cold, surgical. History itself had begun to turn against him, a quiet execution carried out not with fire or blade, but with ink, code, and protocol. He touched the slate with trembling fingers, feeling the chill of a name being erased in real time, the slow disintegration of a career carved over decades. Vorel tried to reach out to allies, retainers, aides, and even peers. Their responses were measured, polite, but their eyes betrayed understanding. They had already recalibrated to a world where he no longer existed. Loyalty had become a currency he could no longer spend. When he spoke, servitors paused, hesitated, and occasionally ignored the voice sprint he had trained them to obey. Every delay, every misfire, every mechanical error became a mirror of his vanishing presence. Authority had been transactional, and the system now withheld payment. He moved to the armory, a space he had once commanded with unquestioned certainty. Racks of weaponry gleamed under the dim, filtered light, each relic of battle now untouchable. Codes that had once recognized his authority denied him access. His fingers brushed over the hilt of an ancient power sword, ceremonial and functional, yet when he attempted to draw it, the locking mechanism refused. The weight of its metal and history pressed down, not as a tool for action but as an accusation. The fortress itself had judged him unworthy. Even objects of tradition and ritual had turned into instruments of exclusion, their resistance a silent chorus declaring his obsolescence. He descended into the lower chambers, where the mechanical heart of the fortress pulsed. Here, cogitators hummed, relays clicked, and servitors moved with programmed precision. Yet all functioned around him, never with him. He issued commands and watched as they were intercepted, overridden, or rerouted. The machinery, once an extension of his will, now acted as a tribunal, observing, cataloging, and denying. Every system, every process, every automaton had become a silent witness to the stripping of his name and purpose, a living testament to the Imperium's capacity to erase without spectacle. Even meals, taken in solitude, became exercises in humiliation. Servitors delivered rations with meticulous protocol, careful to avoid gesture or word that might suggest familiarity. The food itself was adequate, but its delivery was a ritualized reminder of dependence and disconnection. Every action that once reinforced his place in the fortress now underscored his absence. Each breath, each step, each blink was measured against a standard he no longer defined. Vorel's body remained, but the network of recognition and authority that had sustained him had collapsed, leaving him to navigate an invisible labyrinth of loss and redundancy. As the artificial light flickered and shadows deepened, Vorel understood that the stripping was complete in essence, even if not yet formalized in finality. The fortress no longer responded to him as master, as inquisitor, or even as peer. He existed in a state of liminality, a living testament to what happens when the Imperium silently withdraws its acknowledgement. Authority, purpose, and recognition had been wrenched away, leaving only presence and memory. Every corridor, every chamber, every instrument of the fortress served as a silent observer, cataloging the slow decay of a name once revered. In the quiet and darkness, the weight of erasure settled upon him like an unrelenting stone.